expecting. So hi everybody, happy Friday to everybody who is joining live, and welcome to everybody who is joining on demand. If you are new here, hi, my name is Rachel. I am a disruptor in the accounting space. So I am disrupting what it means to be an accountant, what it feels like to have an accountant, and disrupting the concept that you can't scale a business to 7 figures without losing yourself, of which today is a really important topic. So processes, procedures, process notes have really helped James and I to build a sort of engine, or almost like franchising the inside of our business from the very beginning, to really help us comb through any bumps in the road, growing pains, or scaling issues as we have scaled. As with every service-based business, it is not perfect, it will never be perfect, but actually through building really solid processes and procedures, it means that we can increase our company valuation, which I will talk to you about later. So increase our company valuation, comb through any feedback that we get from clients. So through documenting all of our processes, if we ever get some feedback from a client, that means that we can actually start from the beginning and comb it back through. And I'm going to teach you guys how to do the same. And again, through relying on processes and procedures, it means that within our business, we don't just have one point of failure for any given process, which is something that we see business owners do a lot. The format of today is going to be about half an hour to 40 minutes of a deep dive of me walking and talking you through the stuff that we really should be taught when we start our businesses in this way. Then we'll have an open Q&A session. And then as usual, if anybody wants to stick around and do a little bit of networking, it's not super forced, cringy networking. We generally just go through, and as a lovely Friday morning, Rachel ray of sunshine, we normally just go through and talk about what went well for us this week as business owners, because sometimes you might have any like issues in your inbox, or your inbox looks like a hot mess. I think very often as business owners, the finances, but also how we're feeling, are the two really key metrics of success. And so our networking is really just a nice opportunity to go through and talk about what went well for you this week. So today we are doing processes 101. Again, I normally talk about the stuff that we should be taught at school when it comes to finances, because I feel like we all missed that lesson, and that was a lesson that none of us got. But today is very much the stuff that we should be taught at business school. That is coming from somebody who, once I qualified as an accountant, I actually went on to do an MBA. And actually, fundamentally, building a process on the inside of my business was one of the best things that I ever learned at business school, where we took deep dives on my master's in business into standard operating procedures, looking at companies like McDonald's, like how do they nearly get stuff right every time on such a large scale. And so those are the processes, and those are the sort of blueprints that we've taken into Strivex. So before I get stuck in, I will very quickly run through who we are, what we do. So I have 2 parts of my life: accountancy, which is the pink side, and Strivex, which is the blue side. Both of those work together to create a safe place for everybody, to increase people's financial education and decrease the barriers to entry to receiving the financial education that fundamentally changed my life. We've done that through creating completely free, accessible, long and short form content across TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube, which then also provides a funnel into our accountancy practice, which is rapidly scaling called Strivex. And so I wanted to kick off with a bit of a deep dive and ask anybody, you can put it in the chat, or if you're feeling brave enough, I would love to hear from you. Can anybody give me an example of a process that they have in their personal or business life, or a process that they have witnessed? And I'll tell you the type of thing that I'm talking about. So James and I went for a Valentine's Day lunch yesterday in London, and like from the second we walked into this like very expensive London lunch restaurant, like all of the processes were wrong. Like the woman who showed us to our seat didn't say welcome, didn't smile. She was also wearing a coat, which felt quite weird. Like she was in a restaurant wearing a coat, it felt weird. Like she didn't say hello, she didn't say good morning, she didn't like call us by name, even though it was very expensive and they knew our name because we booked it. They sat us down, we waited 10 minutes for drinks. And again, like me and James as 2 accountants are there like, dude, this is just a process. Like, why are you not teaching people to ask their name, ask for drinks, even just give someone water? all of the way through to most people in 2024 have been to Nando's, and you might have noticed that there is a really, really solid process when you eat at Nando's. So the first is that you get seated. The second is that you go up and order your food. Once you've ordered your food, a little stand-up wooden chicken gets put on your table. Then your food comes, and then the staff know that if you have food and a stand-up chicken on your table, you have not been asked how everything with your food is. And so then a waitress will come over, ask you how your food is, and at the same time that they are asking you how your food is, they will take the chicken away from you. So that if someone then has food on their table and are eating with no chicken on their table, everybody else knows that they've been asked. All of the way through to my personal life, me and James, this is an embarrassing one, but full disclosure, me and James have a process where if you use the last of the toilet roll, you put the toilet seat down, and even if you're in a rush, and even if you're like, oh, my webinar starts in 5 minutes, you put the toilet seat down and you put the empty toilet roll on top of the toilet seat so that nobody else sits on the toilet before realizing they have no toilet roll. So I would love to hear from you. We're just two accountants that love process notes living together. If you have any processes in your personal or business life, or if you've noticed anything that as I've just ran through and said, these are all processes, you thought, oh yeah, that's a process. That was a spectrum of how embarrassing you want to go as well. So I thought I'd start if anyone has any processes in their business that they'd like to share. Ooh. Okay, Imogen. Imogen says, I've got loads for every different service. An example of commissioning it. So Imogen is a watercolor illustrator. Commissioning an illustration from when they fill out my inquiry form to when we start the relationship, to working up a sketch for approval, painting the piece, sending for final approval, wrapping packaging up and sending it, and then following up and asking for feedback. Exactly that. And I think very often it would be quite easy to book onto this webinar being like, well, obviously they've got processes and procedures. They're accountants. Like, there's a very formal process. It's quite easy to document, you know, here's some instructions to complete a confirmation statement, or here's a checklist that we need to complete before we file a set of accounts. But actually, whether it is literally just improving your partner's life, like James diarizes 2 weeks before my birthday every year to start finding a birthday present so that I don't cry on my birthday. That's a process, all of the way through to literally just making sure the other person doesn't sit on the toilet when they've got no toilet roll. And that is the best example of processes I've ever seen in my life, which is just me and James like, how can we stop arguing over toilet roll? That was it. And so we're now today just going to take a deep dive into exactly how you can go from an idea, which this is where most people start a business. They have an idea, they have a passion. If we take Imogen as an example, she loves watercolor. Most people start with your business because of a passion, a skill, a talent, or a problem that you are trying to solve. And then through the process of growing it and scaling it, whether that be completely intentional or completely accidental, your business, literally without you realizing it, will turn into this. So you'll go from Imogen just loving watercolor to Imogen, the business owner, who has 17,000 different processes in her business, some of which might be documented, some of which might be not documented at all. But fundamentally, most business owners actually do have all of these elements within their business, whether that is completely formalized or completely informalized. And so when we're thinking about implementing processes, procedures, process notes into your business, what we're looking to do is get you to the position where lots of business owners never get to. So we normally talk about, and Annabella and I do a lot of the like high-level consulting work within our business, where we're working with business owners to either help them start, scale, or exit their business. And what lots of business owners do is get to this point where they have an established business, it's trading, it's making revenue, but fundamentally they are the person that does all of these things, and the business can't really run without them. The next level up from that is documenting lots of these things, removing yourself from the business, maybe being able to go on holiday and your business staying the same without you in it. And then the third section is the golden section that is normally the goal of all business owners, which is to have all of these documented, to have no one point of failure within their business, to be able to step out of the business and go on holiday And rather than the business just stay the same and keep ticking over and delivering services to your clients, you can actually do all of those things and your business still grow. And that's the point of processes and procedures, is to take you from being the one person in your business that knows, okay, I need to recruit, where do I start? Or I need to do my bookkeeping, where do I start? Or I've got an issue with a client that I need to do some relationship management on, or I'm dealing with a complaint, where do I start? Most of that, for a lot of people, exists only in their brain because they actually start here and then they accidentally get here. So going one step further from that feels quite sticky and a bit stiff. And so the end goal is to actually get all of these processes documented. And I'm going to walk and talk you through exactly how to do that and where to start. But next up, I just wanted to talk about not only why that's important and what the end goal is, because the end goal for most people is to be able to go on holiday from their business, whether that is permanently or temporarily, go on holiday from their business, and rather than their business just stay the same, it continues to grow. And so looking at all of those different elements within the business, and these really are the go-to elements, that is a really great checklist. And as a follow-up, we're going to give you this checklist of how to map out processes in your business. These are the sections that you're going to want to be looking at. And there's probably a couple of like easy ones. So if you're looking at this thinking, oh, yeah, like finances is quite an easy one to document. I can just document how to do bookkeeping, how to log into my accounting software, and exactly how to get that done, versus ones that feel a little bit more intangible and are less process driven. So like credit control and HR and finances are normally by default quite process driven in behavior. But then we move over to things like relationship management and service delivery. How do we start, and like where do we start when we're thinking about writing a process for them? So before we get stuck into the juicy bits, I really just wanted to explain the three key reasons why building processes and procedures into your business, other than you being able to go on holiday and grow your business, why these are really, really valuable to business owners. So the first is scalability. As a service-based business, as a service-based business who both from day one of starting a business also wanted to start a family, building processes into our business so that we could scale it, but then also have balance was really important to us. And I think for us, that family piece drove a lot of the processes within the business from day one. And it really gave us quite a strong like emotional attachment and an emotional purpose behind wanting to document all of those processes. But scalability, when you're thinking about your business, as I've just said, you want to be able to turn things off and it still grow. But also as a service-based business, scalability can really help, because if all of your relationship management and service delivery within your business is documented and has process notes, it means that I can onboard a new member of staff in the StriveX way. I can give them process notes to deliver every single service in line with our core values, long-term mission. I can give them guidance on how to tie each process to core values. I can give them documents on where this incorporates into client service package, how we can make sure with every single touch point with a client, we are bringing in those core values, delivering service at a high standard, and what to do if actually that doesn't happen. And so scalability and documenting all of your processes and procedures can get your business to the point where every single element of service delivery has documents. What that gives you as a business owner is no single point of failure. So if I was an accountant, one-man band working on my own, and none of my processes were documented, I might have key man insurance, but then something happens to me. Actually, fundamentally, nobody can take over servicing my clients, or nobody can take over servicing my clients in the same way that I do, because nobody knows how. So scalability is super important. The valuation is also very important. So a lot of the work that I do is working at a high level with businesses who are about to go on or just come off shows like Dragon's Den. I work with business owners to get investment, to close angel investment rounds, and to find angel investments or work with venture capital firms. Through doing that, I value businesses. So in 2023, we did £10 million worth of valuations. And the thing that we see time and time again when it comes to valuations is your business is worth whatever you can sell it for. And the perfect example in this case is Zoopla. Annabella is probably laughing because I use this example all the time. Zoopla. So in the same way that your house is worth whatever you can sell it for, so is your business. And so if we stick with the house example, yes, you can go on Zoopla and see what your neighbors sold their house for. But fundamentally, if you've got someone coming around to your house and it is school pickup and drop off time and everyone's double parked and your neighbors are having an argument with the windows open and everyone in the street can hear it, and you've forgotten to take your bins out and there's a funny smell, you probably won't sell your house for the same amount of money versus you have prepared for somebody coming round. Your house is looking 10 out of 10 clean and tidy. You've put the bread machine on. There's a lovely, lovely waft of like cooking bread through the house. And you tell everyone that Harry Styles lives next door. You're probably going to be able to sell your house for a little bit more than everybody double parking, your neighbors shouting at each other, and there being a bit of a funky smell. And so when it comes to company valuations, we do the same thing. So there are certain elements of your business that on paper, just like searching for what your neighbor sold their house on Zoopla, can give you a guideline. But fundamentally, your ability to value or sell your business is going to come down to the processes and procedures. And so we work with businesses to implement things like board meetings and processes so that you as a business owner can demonstrate that your business can not only continue to grow without you, but actually by keeping you maybe on a retainer or a retention package, then further increases the valuation of your business. So if you had a business owner Bible for your business, that fundamentally is going to increase the valuation of your business because not only are you giving somebody the steering wheel to drive the car of your business, you're also giving them a map of which direction to go in and exactly how to lead that to a position that's going to be as successful as when you did it. And then thirdly, it is protection. So again, worst case scenario for us as business owners is that something happens to us, we have to step out of the business. For me and James, that was always like, could we step back enough to have a family but still work in the business as much or as little as we'd like to? That extra layer of protection comes in, especially when, if you're a Strivex client, we'll be talking to you about things like income protection, we'll be talking to you about critical illness, we'll also be talking to you about things like key man insurance, which is an insurance policy to be able to replace you in your business. All of those things are quite difficult if fundamentally the business relies on you. But if you've got all of these pieces of protection, like tangible insurance policy pieces of protection within your business, but then you're also layering that with your business owner Bible of how to take this instruction manual and run it without you, that fundamentally is going to get you to the point where you have a 10 out of 10 business that is increasing in valuation, increasing in scalability, and increasing in personal protection just by writing down some rules on how to deliver your services without you in the business. So just taking one as an example, this is one of my favorite questions because we actually started our business during COVID. But if we look at disaster recovery, I'd love to know in the chat, or if anyone wants to take themselves off mute, have any of your business processes changed since or as a result of COVID? I can see some frantic typing. Cool, Kevin. So for context, because you know I'm an accountant she and you know I love a name, Kevin is a maths tutor who's called Mathsaurus, 10 out of 10, and he moved his maths tutoring to entirely online, which again actually increased his scalability. He can do it online, on demand. He can work with people all over the world that he wasn't able to before. And so actually changing processes, being able to pivot and lean into agility has meant that lots of people's processes have changed during COVID. And so, again, just bringing in sort of things like disaster recovery, you might look at that and think, oh, I never need disaster recovery. Actually, we've all just been through a world global disaster. And so actually, we probably have changed some business processes during COVID. Susie said client interaction has increased. Response time onboarding needs to be so much faster and efficient. Yeah, exactly. We've seen exactly the same thing. And so again, as we're zooming out, we're looking at your business. Your business starts as just an idea. Suddenly it's this much bigger thing that's made up of like credit control processes, sales processes, compliance, service delivery, all of these things. And you're probably looking at it thinking, actually, yeah, my business has turned into that. It started off being Kevin doing maths tutoring, but actually I do now have all of these processes. I have a process for what to do if someone's not paying me. I have a process of what to do to make sure I'm delivering services in the same way, whether that's lesson plans or just a checklist that I go through before and after every lesson. Every single one of these things will have grown with you and is probably quite intangible right now, but I'm hoping by the end of today you'll have a really clear checklist of how to pick each one of these. And I would definitely encourage you to pick the low-hanging fruit. So things that normally have a traditional process, credit control being the perfect example. If you need more information on credit control, we actually have another on-demand session called How to Get Paid Faster. So if you're a client, we'll have access to that. But if not, you can also buy it on demand if you're not a client. So you can actually write your own processes or use this as an opportunity to improve the processes that you've already got. And so I'm now going to take you through 8 steps, which take you from scoping out what currently exists within your business, all of the way through to having a solid process and testing it repeatedly within your business. So the first thing that we're going to do, again, when you're going through this list, we'll just pick one by one. So if we take credit control as an example, for anyone who credit control is too accountancy, credit control is just making sure that your clients pay you and you are controlling the amount of credit that you are giving to your customers. So as a first step, we're just going to scope out the information that already exists. So the 4 things that we're going to consider with every single task, and again, the reason we do these sessions on demand is so that you can basically watch this again for every single process that you go through, and I can walk and talk you through building processes for every single option. When we're scoping the initial amount of information that we've got or what we're trying to achieve with that process, we're going to look at 4 different things. So the first is the key objectives. So how are we going to measure whether or not this process is working effectively? So that would be like a KPI. So if we take credit control as an example, the key objective of doing credit control is to get paid faster. And I can measure that by looking at how much money I am owed at the end of every single month, either as part of my board meetings or as part of my financial well-being routine. So the objective when I'm looking at credit control is to get paid faster. Stakeholders is a fancy word for people who might be interested in this process. So if it's a sales process or keeping your customers happy process, the main stakeholder and the person with the most interest in this process is going to be your customer. But for things like credit control, you are the primary beneficiary of that process. And so the key stakeholder for credit control is you, and most importantly, your bank account. So for every task, we're going to look at the objectives, the stakeholders. The third thing that we're going to look at is going to be the timeline. So not only are we trying to estimate how long following this process should take, but also what is the timeline for completion and how urgent is that? So that, and the reason we do this now is so that if you imagine scaling your business from Kevin being the only tutor in his business to in 2 years' time, he's got 20 tutors and 1 internal finance member of staff. Actually, when he passes over credit control to somebody else, he not only can say to them, you need to be able to complete this task in 30 minutes, but you can also teach them within that timeline what is urgent and what is important. Which then feeds into the 4th thing that we're going to look at with every piece of process, which is priority. So how important is this process to the delivery of the primary business function? And how does it compare to other projects and objectives? And so I've worked with businesses who really like to just use a very basic, like red, amber, green priority system, all of the way through to almost having someone's job description and monthly tasks labeled into these are the things that you must do every day, these are the things that can wait, and then these are the things, again, you guys will have seen me allocate things into like quick ticks, tasks, and projects. I have an internal process for which ones get done faster and exactly how long they take. So when we're thinking of all of the different elements of our business with that list that I'm going to send you, there's 4 things that we're looking to consider when we're thinking about the process. So the first is the key objective, like what is the point and the purpose of the person? It might be me right now, but it might not be me forever. What is the key objective for the person completing this task? Who cares about the task? So who are the stakeholders in this task? What is the timeline? And then what is the priority? So these factors will really help you to paint a very clear picture of the process and where to start. The next thing that we need to look at is boundaries. So once you've got all of the information in terms of objectives, stakeholders, timeline, and priority, actually we need to put a border around that, because credit control could really easily turn into key account management. Don't chase that person because I see them in the pub every Friday. Or don't chase that person because they give us a lot, like they are part of the 5% of clients that allocate 15% of our income. Don't chase that. So it's really important to put boundaries around every single procedure. So we just want to outline where that process fits into different teams and make sure that everybody who touches that task is very clear on where that starts and finishes. Because again, if we have gaps in between processes, that's where it's really easy for two departments, two different people, or like finance Kevin and admin Kevin looking at each other being like, well, I thought that was your job. So the purpose of boundaries, the purpose of boundaries is to not only make sure that there's no overlap, because that's inefficient, but to also make sure there are no gaps, because through those gaps, very often that's where ineffectiveness falls through. So we've scoped the information, we've looked at objectives, stakeholders, timelines, and priorities, and then we put boundaries around it so that everybody who touches that task has got very clear guidelines on how and when to implement that process. It's important to say as well, like, if I'm saying a lot of these things and you're thinking, well, yeah, that's fine, you've got loads of employees. Most of the processes that existed in our business were written when it was me and James on the dining room table. We knew we wanted to scale, we knew we'd take on a member of staff at some point, but fundamentally we did this to not only increase our sanity and make sure that if ever we needed to step back in an emergency, we could. We're building that Bible, the business Bible. But also, if you do plan to outsource anything, hire a member of staff, or scale in some way, having these processes fundamentally will really, really help you. And again, once I've gone through these elements, I'm going to talk about feedback and getting feedback from clients. So if you have solid processes for everything that happens in your business, let's say we incorporate a limited company. I have a process for a trigger point, which is normally a client reaching out saying, I think I'd like to be a limited company, or a trigger point, which is when we do their tax return, we actually flag that they would be more tax efficient to become a limited company. If I then follow those processes, or a member of my team follows that process from the conversation, from setting the scene in terms of what a limited company is, where we get that tax efficiency from, and how to incorporate the limited company, if we follow that service delivery all of the way through, and then a client comes back to me and says, I found that process really, really confusing, or they might come back and say, I've just incorporated my company, but I didn't know that I had to check the trademarks register to see if I'm going to infringe on someone's trademark. If I have a process, what I also have is a solid process to be able to go back to that client and say, your feedback has just helped every single person who comes after you. It's also helped me change the process that we follow, the correspondence that you receive, and this is what we've done as a result of it. So very often when clients give us feedback, whether that ranges from a grumble to a full-on complaint, very often people are not only wanting to give you feedback, but they're giving you it from a really good place because they want to help you continue to build your business and actually improve the offering that comes to those that come after them. And so we've always found previously that, like, when you've got solid processes, having those processes can really help you to be able to go back to your customers and say, based on your feedback, this is what I've done. Because second to just being listened to and heard, that's what people want. People just want to know that you've done something, what you're going to do to sort of compensate, whether that's, let's just have a 15-minute call and go through it and cover any gaps that you've got. People, apart from being heard, actually just want to know what you've done about it. And when you've got solid processes, you can say, look, running business is like brushing your hair. You don't just brush it once and it's done. You brush it and brush it and brush it again. And your feedback has helped me. Next time I go from the top to the bottom, it will get better. And that's exactly what I've done as a result of it. So once we've scoped the information and we've defined the boundaries, the next thing that we're going to do is determine the process inputs and outputs. So again, if we take the example I've just done, if we do credit control or if we do incorporating a limited company, the inputs to that process are going to either be a client coming to me and saying, I would like to incorporate a limited company, or us preparing a set of sole trader accounts, and then identifying that they could be more tax efficient by incorporating a limited company. So these are what are the trigger points to commencing that process. Then we need to look at what resources we need to complete that process. So if it was incorporating a limited company, I have a checklist of this is the information I need from you, as well as your consent and your agreement to the fee. This is what I need from you. And then the outputs are going to be what you'd like to achieve by the end of the process and what the measurable outcomes are. So by the end of following this process, not only will you have an invoice from StriveX, you'll also have a limited company, you'll have set up a business bank account, and you'll have followed the process that you need to follow to remain compliant with Companies House and HMRC. So the inputs and the outputs, when you're reviewing every single element of your business, are what are the trigger points? So what needs to happen in my business for me to follow this process? If it's credit control, that's probably a monthly diary reminder or as part of your financial wellbeing routine. Again, if you're a client, we have the financial wellbeing routine that you can follow monthly on demand. If you're not a client, you can buy it. So credit control, that would be a monthly trigger point. Incorporating a limited company would be external trigger points that feed into the process. Then what do we need to do that job? And then what are we trying to achieve at the end of it? Is it intangible? Is it just improving a customer's experience and leaving that person better than you found them? Or is it tangible? And you can say, by the end of this process, you will have an incorporated limited company. This can also really help, again, when you're thinking about passing this task over to somebody else. That gives you a really easy way to measure their performance, to make sure that at every single task, you can follow this process. And so if you're teaching somebody else how to do that task for the first time, and they followed the process, they can pass it to you for review. You can follow the process and check that all of the inputs and all of the outputs are exactly as you would expect it to happen. Now this is the fun bit. This is the actual processes. So leading up to this point, we've been zooming out and looking at what do we need to do the job? Have we got everything that we need to do the job? What has led us to actually following this process? Now we're looking at identifying the steps. So we've gathered all of the information through inputs and outputs. Now it's time to actually break your process down into small, actionable steps. We do this within our business, literally you can get lots of different softwares to follow. You can do a Word documents where it's literally a checklist that a member of staff has to complete every single time they follow a process. Again, just for any nerdy accountants that are in the room, a really good example of this would be incorporating a company. If you pass this task to a junior member of staff or someone who had never done it before, and you said, can you just go off and incorporate a limited company? They could follow the process, and it could be that they follow the entire process step by step, but at the end of it, you come to review it and you're like, you've just incorporated a company by guarantee, not by shares, which has a huge impact on the client. And so it's really, really important. And the best way to write these processes is through doing. And so I would recommend, if you are planning on having like a processes period within your business, make sure that every single time you pick up a task to complete, you do the task. I'm like a multiple screen girly, so when I work, I look like I'm driving a plane. Like, have the work that you're doing on one screen and then have a Word document on the other screen. And as you are doing every single thing, write a list on the other page of what you're doing. My top tip is to start every sentence with a verb, because that really helps. And I apply the Martian technique to every single process that I write. So anybody, including an alien who has just landed on this planet, should be able to pick up this Word document, follow this process, and get to the same output as before. Whether that is taking this Zoom recording, putting it into a PDF, making a toolkit, and emailing it out to everybody who joined the webinar, all of the way through to preparing a set of accounts or incorporating a limited company. Obviously, we've got qualified accountants, not Martians, but that is literally the process that you have to follow to make sure there's no gaps, we've got clear boundaries, and that you are delivering a 10 out of 10 service to your customers. So top tip is to start every line with a verb, whether that's click, go, like start every sentence with a doing word. And so by looking at each point in the process, you'll be able to follow step by step. So you'll go from what has triggered this process to start all of the way through with individual steps in sequential order. And again, if there are multiple tasks that are needed to complete one thing, list every single one of them within that step. We're then also, so we've zoomed out, we've looked at the task, we're going to identify every single step that has to happen. We're then going to go back to the stakeholders, look at our tasks, look at the steps that we've identified need to be followed in order to deliver this service. And we're going to go back to the stakeholders and break it down to look at who is responsible for doing this task. And does that mean that we are delivering what we set out to achieve in the beginning? The next is a process. So this for a lot of people is the fun part, which is visualizing a process. You might have noticed that I am actually currently doing that on screen. So I'm actually laying out the process for preparing a process. So this is how you can lay out processes. Again, it could be a Word document. There's lots of different, I think Asana is a really good one for mapping out processes that we've used with lots of clients, all of the way through to things like Loop and Notion are a really great way to keep records as well. And so this process is all about actually building a process that is very easy to follow, whether that is on a workflow management tool, a Word document, whatever platform is native to you and makes the most sense for your business. And now that we've constructed that process, we actually need to note any exceptions that you and your team might come across. And so these exceptions come from the fact that not every single flow is going to follow the same path. So again, if we use credit control as an example, it could be that you want this exact process to be followed, apart from where the invoice is more than, I don't know, 2% of your total annual revenue, or if that client is marked as key account management. So key account management, again, is a process that you can follow to make sure that the top chunk of your customers are looked after in a 10 out of 10 way. So an exception for default credit control could be check that that customer is a key account. If that customer is a key account, do not just email them to remind them that their invoice is due. Call them, ask them how they are, have a lovely conversation, and then remind them. Again, for us, within the accountancy practice, if we're doing credit control, one of the first things that we might check as an exception to credit control is if we do the bookkeeping, can we check that this invoice is actually on their system to be paid before we chase them? And so really following the boundaries of exceptions. And again, exceptions can be things like whether or not something needs to be reviewed before you hit the big red button, all of the way through to the complexity of the work. And so just noting any exceptions to this process. And then again, the brushing the hair technique. The final thing that you need to do before you pass this to anybody else is to test your process. So within this processing life cycle, once you've mapped out your processes, it's really, really important to actually test the fact that your process is working. So again, if we use incorporating a limited company as an example, you might know to incorporate a company by shares. An alien wouldn't know to incorporate a company by shares. So if you've just sort of word vomited a process and you're actually coming back to test it, that would flag to you that you've missed a step in that process. And so again, you get to the bottom of your hair, you go back to the top and you continue going. So you'd want to comb and comb and comb that process until you are like, hand on my Bible, I could pass this to an alien. They could follow this with very clear instructions and still get to the same result, noting any exceptions to this process. So while you're testing, really important to identify any issues that come up, any gaps in the process, because this is your chance to really fine-tune that process. So making any necessary changes so that it can run as smoothly as possible. So again, it could be, if we use our process as an example for incorporating a limited company, if a client came back and said, that was actually quite confusing, I had a lot of information given to me at the start, because when we're incorporating a limited company, we have to tell people certain things. We have to tell them, these are your legal responsibilities. And so we might actually just test that process and review what we can do to make it as streamlined as possible, giving people optional resources, but keeping that initial process as short as possible. And there's a couple of questions that you can ask yourself as you're testing to really uncover any specific pain points as well. So the first is, did this process document actually solve the problem that you were looking to fix? Because sometimes if we're all a bit enthusiastic about our business, we can like take a process in another direction. So did this actually solve the process? And then do you need to implement any larger or wider changes in order for this to actually run efficiently? Again, credit control is a really good example because as business owners, we know all of our customers. If you today ran a list of all of the customers that owe you money, if as a business owner, part of your process is you mentally remembering, oh yeah, that person said they'd pay me next week, or that person said they were going to post me a check. I don't know if anyone still does that. They said they were going to post me a check, all of the way through to I'm seeing that person next week, so I'll just ask them. That actually is highlighting a gap in your process for either you to document your preferences when it comes to credit control, or to put an extra step in your process for credit control where you have to review the credit control before somebody is actually actioning it and chasing your customers. So credit control is a really good example because normally for business owners, that credit control process actually relies on the business owner saying, don't chase that person, do chase that person. You could chase that person with capital letters and angry bits because they really do owe us money and they're ignoring me, all of the way through to that person is a key account, they're responsible for a lot of income, do not contact them. That's a really good example of where a lot of these elements are kept in your head. And so if we go back to remembering the purpose of processes in your business is scalability, increasing your valuation because you can prove that your business can operate to your standards with your core values, with your service package without you. And then to also protect you as a business owner. So you know, I have key man insurance, critical illness insurance, and any other insurance policies which protect me in my business. And I can actually replace myself because I have processes. Because it's one thing, again, if I use accountants as an example, it's one thing me hiring an accountant to replace me in my business, but fundamentally, if they're not going to deliver it in line with the service package that my client signed up to, we're going to have a problem. So the point of processes for you as a business owner is to take your business from that cloud picture, which was you with an idea, Imogen with watercolor, Kevin with maths and tuition, to take you from that process to actually having a scalable, franchisable, if you ever wanted it to be, machine on the inside of your business, which takes your service offering, your values and your service package, and means that an alien who has just landed on the planet could pick that up and a mathsaurus student would receive the same service delivery simply by following your processes. That is the zoom out point through stress testing, as well as being able to give you, if you are a service-based business owner, because this is normally much harder, as well as giving you a really tangible but open, transparent, and human way to start a conversation with a client where your service has failed. By actually saying to them, this is the process that we followed, so you can explain to them where there was a drop, maybe there was overlap, maybe there was a drop in between the boundaries. This is where this fell. This is exactly what I'm going to do to not only rectify it for you, but improve it for the people that come after you. So it can really help you with the compliance and continuing service delivery on your product. As always, if anything that I've said today you want some more information on or more deep dives, you can scan the QR code. To tell people that you were here today, you can take snippets of this, pop it on your Instagram stories, get some marketing done at the same time as joining us today, as well as getting a deep dive into some questions. We've actually already had a question in the chat. Malia said, regarding documentation and process notes, where do you store them? Is this digital/physical? So in our business, we are completely paperless. I am scared of paper cuts and hate paper. Like, we don't own a printer, so all of our stuff is digitally processed. So we literally have a central hub of process notes that are split into stakeholders, so the people who would use those processes, all of the way through to processes that are applicable to everybody. And I guess the one bit of processes that I haven't spoken about is processes that are for specific tasks, and then processes that are for maybe smaller but like intangible things. So I called a client earlier in the week and they asked for an introduction to a solicitor. We have a list and we have a process central document, which is a list of professional recommendations that we make that again are in line with our service offering, our core values. They're people that we have worked with personally. We have a list of recommendations that we make with templated emails in line with our service agreement. The detail, there's literally a template for, again, even a junior member of staff, if they speak to a client and a client says, who do you do for your trademarks, or what do you do for solicitors' fees? They can go to professional recommendations. They can say, oh, we actually have someone that I can introduce you to, with a template that introduces them to the right person with the right introduction, making sure that the right information has been handed over from one person to the other as well. Susie has got a hand up.
Hello, hello. Hi, Rachel. This is awesome, by the way. I'm having a great time. My question is about processes to implement with clients. So I am, among other things, finance manager. And so I work with small charities who basically outsource their financial department to me, essentially. So a lot of it is just like looking into their processes and changing them up. And so I was wondering whether you had any insight on how to make the resistance a little bit less resistant with clients. I mean, what I usually do is I try to talk about the impact of the change. So there's a reason why things I recommend these changes is because these were the problems, and this process would resolve those problems. But sometimes I'm still met with, especially the managers who have been doing things a certain way for a number of years, that are like, oh, but this has worked so far. So do you have any other specific insight or recommendation when changing other people's processes?
Of course. I think the two key things to always link it to as part of a wider conversation are compliance, which is really easy if it's finance. So tying that to compliance, like there's probably a reason that you're going to be suggesting what you are suggesting, whether that is a process for, if it's charities, if it's a process for banking petty cash, there's going to be a compliance reason that you are suggesting it. So tying it back to compliance as a first step is normally an easy win when it comes to finances. There is usually a compliance reason that you're making that change. And then also tying it to core values, because very, very often, especially within our business, I'd say 70% of every process is following the process, but 30% of those process notes are actually going to be, how can you tie this to a bigger purpose? Like, is there a step in every single process to make the person stop, use their brain? Like, that is an acceptable line to have on a process, is use your brain and think about how you can leave this client better than you found them. So what is it? Is it to make sure that you've asked more questions than you've answered at every touch point? Because if Kevin came to me and said, what's my corporation tax going to be this year? That's the question that he's come to me with, but that's not his problem. His problem's actually like 3 questions down. So if Kevin comes to me and says, what's my corporation tax? And I say, and I like ask more questions, it's probably, he's asked me about corporation tax because he's in a cost of living crisis. He's worried about the impact on his customers because they are individuals who are in a cost of living crisis more than businesses, because he's a B2C business. And actually the problem is 4 steps down, where we need to review his pipeline or his prices. And so even having elements within that process to not just do the compliance stuff, but actually have a process that says, literally take 60 seconds to think about the process that you're following and how you can make, so we actually have on the bottom of every single process is, please provide suggestions on how to make this process better on every single process. So every single time a member of my team follows a process and passes that to their manager to review, they have to tick a box that says, I have thought about any processes that could make this better. And so even in that case, it could be that you say to the team that you're working with, I'm going to implement this process, and if you fundamentally think you could do this better, I've got great news for you, because every single time you follow this process, you get to tell me how you think we can make it better. So that's like a really good segue into, you're there like, haha, you are continuously improving my process, even when you don't want to follow it. But from their perspective, they feel heard, listened to, they get to lean into that sort of core values piece and really do that as well. Does anybody else have any questions? I'm just going to stop sharing my screen so I can see you all. I'll leave the recording on for a second.
I'm just going to ask, what proportion of your like processes do you think of as like until now I think I've mostly thought of processes as automations. You know, someone comes into a mailing list, they go through Zapier or something, and then it's that's the only sort of process I have. I wonder, so like when you look at the stuff you do, how much of it is like people doing things, and how much is it sort of software that you've set up to kind of to do things without those people involved? I don't know.
It's a good question. I
Yeah.
think 30% is automated, 70% is people, mainly because I feel the need to document automated processes much fewer. And actually, by building the automation, you've already built the process. But when you're dealing with a person, it's so much more important to have like this is the process that you need to follow. And the one bit that you can't get a computer to do is to like that element of how can we make this process better? How can you leave this person better than you found them? And even like we actually have processes on certain tasks to diarize. We literally call it a welfare check on the client. So if a client, for example, has had to drop a service, maybe they've said, I need to take my bookkeeping in-house because I can't afford it anymore. We will actually diarize a welfare check like 30 days after that, because normally people are only dropping accounting services because something fundamentally is going wrong within their business. Obviously, I could do a whole sales pitch about why bookkeeping is the last thing you should drop if something's going wrong in your business, but actually just really leaning into that like person-centered element of it, because this is why we do all of this stuff, right? Like you build processes within processes that care about people, are connected to core values because you care about your customers. And so I think normally automating or using AI, by building that process in the start with, you've built that process. And so for us, like 70% of this is leaning into how we can leverage the person-centered element of it whilst also leaning into automation. Malia's got her hand up.
Cool. So I have a question about like customer service, and for me, similar to you, Rachel, like my business is like a personal brand, a little bit mixed. So people identify with me, and I speak very informally and like conversational and build a relationship. So if I want to outsource customer service and have processes for that, the thing I find difficult is how do I like make templates if an order was missing, blah, 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 but still maintain the authenticity and personality by giving it to someone else? Like, how have you navigated things like that?
That's a really good question. And Annabella is grinning because Annabella in the last 7 or 8 months has actually taken off quoting for clients from me. As well as Tamsin, who does all of my digital marketing support. The one thing that I as the person who was like delegating these tasks to other people, really had to lean into is tone of voice. So what is your tone of voice? For me, it's certain words, it's certain phrases, it's things as simple as certain emojis. Like, so especially when it comes to customer service and sort of who you are online, is tone of voice. So that's what separates you from if you drafted something versus you asked ChatGPT to draft something. Again, ChatGPT is very outcome driven. The difference between what ChatGPT suggests you write and what you are going to write yourself is tone of voice. And so we actually have like we have tone of voice guidelines and tone of voice branding documents, which give people, like literally give people who support me working with people en masse, set like phrases and tone of voice things that they can use. Again, with customer service, I would tie that back into the processes. So do you have a complaints process? Is that complaints process set in 4 levels, from a grumble to a capital letters bright red shouting? Because really, like most complaints should be dealt with at a grumble level and should never get up here. But the process for dealing with the grumble is different to a my bin's on fire and I'm throwing it at you. So actually making sure that all of those processes are different, but again, follow the same critical path to get to the same answer. But again, if you are looking at working with somebody to help you in answering customer service emails, for example, where's my order? I would imagine like actually 90% of that can be templated in with your tone of voice, with your emails, like with certain emojis, with a actually, if you were writing this stuff yourself, which I imagine you do on a daily basis, again, if you just have a process period within your business where you're gearing up to pass it to somebody else, every single time you write one of those emails, add it to a Bible, look at the similarities, look at the differences, and then you'll be able to give people a list of, if someone is inquiring about the status of their order within 3 days of placing their order, this is the response. If somebody's inquiring after 3 days and it really should have been delivered, there's a problem, so there's a different response. And so I think it would be not easy, but probably easier than you think to be able to zoom out and formulate a lot of those, as well as if you found the right person to do that job, give them the ability to make discretionary decisions. So it could be, again, if you've got someone who is quite angry, you can say to them, like, in order to solve that complaint, if it's a grumble, we just answer the problem. If it's a 2 out of 4, we do this. If it's a 3 out of 4, you have my permission to give them a 5% discount code off their next order. And if they're shouting, I give you permission to escalate that to me.
Thank you.
I just love processes. Does anyone else have any more questions? Oh, Kevin said, if you're doing these things yourself, there's a great tool called Text Expander where you can set up a template. And then if you ever type complaint, it just brings up the text. Yes. And again, if you're using Microsoft Outlook, you can set up quick parts. So quick parts is where you type DEL for delivery, and it would say like, hey, thanks for inquiring about your delivery. It literally just brings up the templates. And so quick parts, again, having sort of like a Bible of responses or a workflow that says, and I would say like complaints, or even with you, Malia, of someone being like, where my order, like 4 seconds after they place their order, like actually breaking out that that's not a complaint, but it is a grumble, and that fundamentally is attached to your personal brand. And so it could be that yours are actually split out into like 10, whereas ours is grumble is 1 out of 4, full on complaint is a 4 out of 4. Ours is much more clear cut, I think, really, in terms of what is a, you know, I thought someone would reply to me a bit quicker than this, is a grumble, but a full on like company's house is shouting at me and everyone's ignoring me. Actually, it could be for you because you're dealing with B2C on much more volume. You've probably got like actually 10 people within that process that looks at what's going on in there too. So just making sure it fits when you're like scoping out that work, making sure it really fits with who it is that you're talking to. Any more questions from anyone else before I stop the recording and then we get into some networking? Alrighty.